All right, this is the Module 4 video, and you are moving right along. Hopefully you have all the books by this point. You are in, let's see, Spring Chapter 4, you are in the Darling Hammond Chapter 2, and the Diane Ravitch Chapter 2 for this particular module. So, the way the modules work, as you know, is you watch the video, you look at the checklist, and then, hopefully you do the assignments, preferably in the order that I gave them to you, but you don't have to, obviously. So for Spring Chapter 4, he's going to talk, about the Common School and the Common School movement. And I think that the Common School is obviously very important to today's schooling because we haven't really, it's the model for what our schools are today. And it's the sort of the skeleton for what our schools are today because we've topped and added a bunch on to what we believe that schooling should be today and the services that schools should provide and the kinds of education that schools should provide. But you should see a real link between what these schools were and what our schools are today. So some of the goals, what were some of the when he says ideology, he's really saying, what was the basis for implementing these schools? What were the societal needs happening at the time? And, there's a little fill-in activity there that you can just do for yourself. It's not to turn in. It's just to sort of quiz yourself. And so you're going to look at, some of the tall order that was supposed to happen starting about this time in history for schools. They're supposed to solve crime and poverty. They're supposed to reduce tensions between the classes. They're supposed to, what else? Stabilize the political system and, establish patriotism. What else are they supposed to do? Oh, and of course, promote the Anglo-Protestant, ethic of the time, the majority ethic at the time. So you'll notice, and there's a lecture for this particular chapter on YouTube, and the link is there in your module. But what you'll notice is there's some inherent problems in some of those goals. And then there's some different perspectives that some of the educational curriculum historians have come up with for what they think about the Common School. So, look over some of those and just, obviously make your own decision based on the evidence of what you think was going on at the time. Okay, then you're going to move on to Chapter 2 of Darling Hammond. Now, Darling Hammond, I do recognize, and I have had students complain, she's a little bit dry to read. She's a little bit boring. I understand that. Trust me, I understand that. The problem is she's presenting a lot of important information. And maybe that's one of the problems is that people aren't aware of what's going on because it is kind of heady. It's very, she's very statistics laden in her books. But, that's a good thing, I think. She could be criticized the other way around. Let's say she's a propagandist who just says whatever she feels like and then doesn't back it up with any statistics or any real factual data. She would then be accused of not supporting her opinions. So, and of course, I think of my dad whenever I look at all of these statistics, and he used to quote Mark Twain, and he used to say, there's 3 types of lies. What was it? 3 types of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. So just keep that in mind. Statistics can always be taken with a grain of salt, but I think that Linda Darling Hammond is obviously somebody that you can trust. She, again, was supposed to be in line to be the Secretary of Education under the Obama administration. Did not become that. I think there's lots of issues. I'll give you my opinion maybe later on in the course about why I think that happened. But anyway, so Darling Hammond, she talks about educational inequality. There's a lot of news, a lot of information about what we call the achievement gap. And the achievement gap is, of course, the basis for No Child Left Behind, NCLB, and that legislation that came through. It basically went live in 2002. I was a teacher in the public schools at the time. I started teaching in 1998. So I watched what happened before No Child Left Behind and, of course, what happened after No Child Left Behind. I left the public school system in 2010. And, it was difficult to watch what this whole thing had, this piece of legislation had done to what I considered a really fun job at the time. Hopefully it's turning around and changing a little bit, but it's got to happen at least sometime, hopefully soon. I'm not trying to discourage anybody from being a teacher by any means. I really enjoyed my job, and you'll see more about that later on as well. Anyway, educational inequality. So she talks a lot about, we know a lot about the achievement gap, and this is the gap between Hispanic, Latino, African American students and white students that, No Child Left Behind talked about. But she's also going to talk about, this also deals with socioeconomic status. There's a big achievement gap between wealth, between poor kids and rich kids as well. And of course, there is some correlation between ethnicity and socioeconomic status in this country, unfortunately. So anyway, she's going to talk about the opportunity gap as well, which may be something that you've learned about already, maybe not. Maybe it's a new sort of a phrase that you've heard, but the opportunity gap is a little bit different than the achievement gap. The achievement gap is basically talking about, test scores. The opportunity gap, though, of course, is what leads up to getting those test scores. The opportunity gap is the accumulated differences in access to these educational resources that promote learning. It could be the community. It could be in the school itself. It could be at home. And if you talk about opportunity gap when you're talking about achievement gap, they're really interrelated. So I believe that's what your discussion question is about this time in Module 4 as well. But she brings up some really important points, and that's that, poverty limits, well, lots of things, but it limits early learning, early childhood learning. Okay, so by the time kids start kindergarten, you've already got huge gaps between poor and rich, or middle class at least. Resegregation has occurred across the country, and there's a lot of talk about that in both books, I believe. There's a lot of unqualified teachers who are being allowed to teach, and not just allowed to teach, but these unqualified teachers are being allowed to teach in the highest need areas. In a lot of rural areas, they can't get teachers. In a lot of urban areas, poor areas, they cannot get teachers. So we're basically sending our least qualified teachers to teach kids who have the highest need. And then, of course, there's a lack of high quality curriculum that, you'll have to judge whether you think the Common Core curriculum is solving this or not. All right, so moving on to Ravitch. Let's see, what did Ravitch talk about? I think she talked about the standards movement. Yes, the standards movement becomes the testing movement. So she talks a little bit about how that morphed, how standards sort of morphed into testing. And I think we are all, I've seen in your discussions, we are all very aware of the fact that testing is mattering a little too much in education today. So she talks about how the curriculum has become very bland, blah, vague, because, nobody wants to offend anybody else. And, what has this really done? These different political parties and different political movements and so forth. What has this done to our education curriculum? And, she doesn't like it. It's not specific enough. And she's always been a proponent of a very high quality, very specific curriculum. So you'll have to decide how you feel about that. And then, of course, No Child Left Behind. She talks about where it came from. And I think this is really important history for you to understand that in 1983, A Nation at Risk was a big report that came out, of course, of the Ronald Reagan era. And it bashed the schools. It basically said, oh, we're failing our schools. We're, the sky is falling. The sky is falling. Our educational system is going to leave us behind, and all of these other countries are going to take over and have much better economies than we have because our education system is so bad. Now, this has happened many times across history. I just want you to know that. But this particular one is closer to our historical period, and of course influenced No Child Left Behind, and she shows you how that happened. She's a lot kinder to ANAR, A Nation at Risk, than many historians are. That particular document had questionable statistics backing it up, sometimes had absolutely no data backing it up. If you read certain people's analyses of that particular document or policy document. So just, keep all of these things in mind, that there's lots of different opinions out there. Everybody's got one. But anyway, that's what you're going to learn in Ravage. So then you're going to answer the discussion prompt. I told you I think it's about the achievement versus the opportunity gap. And make sure you understand that concept. And then you're going to take the second quiz. Remember, it's always open book, and I take information from the previous 2 modules. So for this module, it'll be for Module 3 and Module 4. So make sure that you have, hopefully copies of those PowerPoints and your notes from the chapters that you've read. Be thinking about the essay, the Schools in Film essay. That's a big part of your grade. And it's a big assignment that will be coming up after the midterm, but you should be thinking about it. You should be starting to think about at least the movies that you're going to watch in order to complete that assignment. There's a list of all of the movies and what's required in the assignments folder, which brings me to the critical issue project that you'll do. That's sort of your final project for this class. And that information is also in the assignments folder. So please start looking at that. And if you have any questions, let me know. And then also, I think I said in this particular module, please let me know your field experience placement. More so if you're doing a field experience outside of the accepted on the list field experience venues. If you're going to be doing anything that's not on that list or not in the field experience packet, you must get my permission. And I don't want anybody to start doing something that is perhaps not allowed or whatever. So I think that's it for Module 4, and I will talk to you again in Module 5.